Hello everyone, Happy New Year, Happy 2022. Hope you had a nice Christmas, hope you had a nice New Year, and hope you're looking forward to all the good things in the year ahead. I hope it was fun this year, hope you got to see people, hope you got to have a nice time, and it wasn't too interrupted by continuing pandemic weirdness. Anyhow, I'm going to crack on because we have got another pair of White Dwarfs to look at. This is January New Year 1984. Now this is a pertinent and important year, but we probably won't find out until October. So you're going to have to keep watching until then to find out why 1984 is an important year in White Dwarf history. But stay with me until then. We're going to start with January. So this is 1984 and 1994. Now I think it's very clear to say that both of these editions are very much January editions of these magazines. I think it's fairly obvious that the staff were quite busy over Christmas and didn't perhaps have as much time as they would normally have to put the magazine together. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's certainly how it feels. Something to note on the cover here, not just that it's a sci-fi cover, but look, we've got a bit of a change in font going on there. This is white light. The white writing on here now obviously makes this a step closer to the White Dwarf of the future. If I skip ahead here to the letters page, we can see in Tim from Westlake in Devon's letter, he asks for there to be more focus on Traveller and the sci-fi role-playing games as opposed to AD&D and RuneQuest and the more fantasy ones that perhaps the magazine has focused on in the past. And this seems to be an issue giving Tim from Westlake his wish. You can see from the cover here, this is very clearly a sci-fi edition of White Dwarf. On the first page we've got another character here. This is Agaroth the Unwashed. Do you remember the character from the last edition? Here's another brilliant Citadel character that, as far as I'm aware, has never made it into miniature. Perhaps we should do a series of these guys in tribute. There's some cool ads here. There's a dungeon building ad from Prince Augustin. In fact, there are quite a lot of these sort of dungeon scenery companies seem to be advertising at this time. We've also got a nice special offer here, Citadel Miniatures Dwarves, a page taken from the forthcoming Warhammer supplement, Forces of Fantasy. So that's coming up soon. And we do have quite a heavy focus on sci-fi in this edition. So the first thing that we come across here, Shuttle Scuttle. This is a bit of a weird, I gather from the writing here that the person who's come up with this has been running it at conventions, at shows. So this is one GM running between two different groups of players, one playing hijackers of a shuttle, one playing the security forces trying to work out what's going on the shuttle and dealing with the situation. It sounds quite fun. I can't imagine actually running it as a scenario. It is quite fun. I just think it would be an absolute massive headache for the GM having to run between two different groups of players, but obviously somebody did do it. Have you done it? If you've done it, let us know. It could work quite interestingly. Open box has a look at Starship Traveller and City of Thieves. Now, City of Thieves is one of my favourite fighting fantasy books, so it's quite nice to see that written down here. In fact, I'd like to do a sort of physical, real-world setting of Port Blacksand. I think that would be a lot of fun to do in miniature. I'm getting there with my civilians and some pirates and some buildings. I need to really work on the buildings before I can do that. Another nice adventure from Thrud. Some variant RuneQuest characters for people who want to just use some standard AD&D classes in RuneQuest. Ideas for using fleets in Traveller. I've not actually played Traveller, but the guy who's written this is suggesting that being pursued by massive, great starships is perhaps not as much fun as encountering little fleets. That's certainly a possibility. There is a fantasy scenario in here, The Key of Tarandor, and this is part one of the adventure. this is not my favourite fantasy campaign adventure in White Dwarf. It starts off at the very beginning saying this is a one-off campaign set in its own world to fit it into an existing campaign, make it clear to the players they have somehow entered a different universe. Well, maybe that's okay for D&D of this era, but honestly, if I was a player and the GM said, right, you're all in a completely different universe now, I'd be like, what, how, why, where did that come from? I also really don't think it's necessary. The only major thing that I can see in this scenario that would that needs to happen is that magic needs to be fairly low powered, or in fact non-existent. So surely you just have an event or a sort of sphere of influence in which magic has no effect. You don't need to transport them to a whole different world for that. And this really is a very linear adventure. This is a sort of, you have an encounter with a person, and as a result of that you get a piece of a key, and there's one character whose role is very much stipulated as they're drawn to the pieces of the key, and I feel like playing that character in this scenario would be really irritating. It would almost be better to have that as an NPC player, or at least brief that player beforehand and have them play it a bit more as a GM. And maybe not let the other players know, but I just feel like being given a very niche, very typical or a very specified character as a player in this would be really quite irritating. And it's fairly, what's the word, unsubtle. I mean, you know, you have an adventure, you get a bit of the key. You have another adventure, you get the next bit of the key. There's not really a lot of sort of mystery or enigma to this, and I feel like the encounters are also quite stereotypical. This is not my favourite, but we'll come to the part 2 in the next edition. Another glimpse at the Goblin Cults. Last time we had the cult of Cromcruk, and so of course we've got the cult of Kernu this time, so that's like Cern, I guess, the hunter. The alternative, the nice goblin cult, the hunter goblin cult, as opposed to the goblin cult of destruction. We've got a little clip here of someone's account of Games Day, and he's talking about Steve and Ian will soon have competition in the gamebook field. Apparently Gary Chalk and Joe Deaver have been lured away from Games Workshop by a lucre-laden offer from Hutchinson Publishing Group to do a similar series of books, similar to the Fighting Fantasy books. I guess that would be the Lone Wolf series, which I actually love more than Fighting Fantasy. Lone Wolf is my favourite series of game books. I need to play through them again. Excited by that. Some insects for D&D, AD&D. We've got a bit of illusionist spells. The feedback from the White Dwarf questionnaire, in which universally everyone hates the Travellers. Get rid of the Travellers comic strip. There's quite a lot of weird contradictions in here, but generally it's people saying we want more D&D, we want less D&D, we want more RuneQuest, we want less RuneQuest, get rid of the Travellers, get rid of the Travellers, get rid of the Travellers, get rid of the Travellers. If the readers of White Dwarf agree on anything right now, it's getting rid of the Travellers. And then we're at an end. So yeah, very, very much not full of high quality content in this edition. Does feel rather sort of thrown together. Anyway, let's jump forwards 10 years to 1993. We've got a very Space Wolfy cover here because we're still in recent 40k, still having a massive focus on 40k in this edition. We've got the Adeptus Arbites here. Now, I first came across these because this predates me getting White Dwarf for the first time. Not by much, but by a little bit. I first came across these Arbites in the Necromunda context. The Necromunda's got some faux Judge Dredd types, because they are very obviously Judge Dredd judges. But apparently they existed in 40k as a sort of elite Imperial Guard troop on by themselves. I can't really see them getting very much use other than in special scenarios on the battlefield, but there you go. They do seem much more suited to the confines of Hive City. Mike McVeigh talks about his heavy metal painting guide, along with some demonstrations of how to paint the various Craft World Eldar. Now, there are some discrepancies here. I don't think these figures, in some cases, are the figures that Mike McVeigh was actually talking about when he did the painting. He was probably talking about previous ones he'd done from the studio, and then did these for the painting lineup, because there are some references to bone colour when it's very clearly bright yellow. I'm not sure that's photography. I think that's definitely a wrong colour choice. And there are also it's talking about the use of chainmail in some miniatures here, where they really don't have very obvious chainmail. So I don't think these are the figures that Mike was talking about. Arcan the Black here, taken pretty much verbatim straight out of the Undead army book, which was coming up imminently. So as they did with the Skaven in previous editions, they've taken this out from the Undead Army book and printed it in White Dwarf. It's nice to have the rules in White Dwarf. Clearly they wanted to sell the model before the army book came out. Arcan the Black's one of those weird ones. I mean, I like him as a model. I'm not so keen on his massive chariot with its really bizarre sort of manticore head. I think they were sort of struggling for ideas for what they could do for a flying chariot to be like the sort of Wild Hunt flying chariot. And they came up with, oh, it's an undead manticore. Yeah, maybe sort of fits the sort of silliness of the era of the time. The thing that I'm not quite sure in here, having not played Arcan on the field, is what you do with the Tomb Blade of Arcan once you've raised a unit of skeleton warriors that have to have Arcan as the leader. Does that mean they have to surround his chariot, or can he on foot lead them? His chariot presumably then can't fly and leave the unit. Yeah, of all of his gear, that doesn't make much sense with him on the chariot. Maybe with him on foot, but with the chariot not so much sense. I don't know. Golden Demon 94. There you go. This is advertising, so these are previous editions of this must be from Golden Demon 93 and previous, laying out the categories, asking for applicants. And Skaven monsters and characters also called, I think I'm right, I might be wrong, these might be additional to the army book. I haven't actually checked, but I think these are again pulled from the Skaven army book that was released previously, so not special content particularly to White Dwarf. This is interesting though. Warlord Queek Head Taker in here. This model I've got as my Warlord model in my Chaos Army, and I was sure that he was a late 5th edition model. He feels much more modern than even the other sort of Skaven of this era, but maybe he's not, or apparently he's not, because he's appeared here, so he must be an older model than I think he is. 40k battle bunkers. So here you get this edition, although the card stock is no longer in here, came with a cut out and build 40k battle bunker, and also some instructions not only for building it but for using it in games, and for a special scenario using the battle bunker. There you go, the strong point, using the bunker. So that's pretty cool. Interesting to note that if you have a look at the coloration of the bunkers on this page here, you've got a very blue one and a very grey one. One of these I think is probably printed out directly from someone in the studio's home laserjet printer, just to check before they sent it off to production, and the other one's the production model. It does actually tell you what Citadel paints the original was painted with, so if you have one of those paints you can compare it to this photograph and you can go see which one is the original, which one is the officially professionally painted printed print-out version. There's also a Man of War battle report. As far as I'm aware, the only Man of War battle report in White Dwarf, but I might be wrong. There might be another one lurking somewhere that I don't remember. It didn't work particularly well, as in fact Andy Jones and Jervis Johnson suggested in their introduction that it might not, because Man of War strings out a lot longer game than fits neatly into a few pages of White Dwarf. So it does feel rather rushed. There's a lot of, here's my plan, this is what I'm going to do, and then a lot of, this is what I did, this was what went well, this is not what didn't go well, and not a lot of actually playing the game turn by turn, taking you through everything. Plus the fact that this is a massively one-sided fight. It's very obvious here that the Imperial fleet is going to be massively slaughtered by the Dark Elf fleet. That's obvious from the very beginning, and even the designers and the professional players say that at the front. They say this is not going to go well for the Imperial side, which this is an era of points-based balanced games supposedly, and it doesn't really say that well. I'm not particularly fussed about points-based balanced games. I think there are more interesting things that you can do. But that was very much the feel of the time, and I don't feel like this game really showed that the points basis offered much of a balanced chance for the Imperial player. Catalogue pages, I do love a catalogue page, even though this is mostly Man of War. Classic Goblins there, Arcan the Black, of course, with his chariot, some modern Skaven, I said modern Skaven, haha, 4th edition Skaven, Rat Ogres and Vermin Lord, still the best Vermin Lord model obviously, but none of the Jez Goodwin Skaven from the previous edition. Some epic, some Imperial agents, there's the Arbites there again, but that also with a massive chunk from the middle pulled out of the undead and the Skaven army books, a chunk pulled out of the forthcoming heavy metal guide. It felt like they were a little bit strapped for content for this issue as well. I guess we'll let them off, having had a busy Christmas probably. Next month there might be some more content, so stick with me and we will have a look in February and see what's next for the decades of White Dwarf. See you next time.